bright golden haze on the meadow. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow, and the corn is as high as an elephant's eye, and it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. Oh, what a beautiful...
Well, that didn't work. This morning I followed the suggestion from Alton Brown's blog and used 1/4 teaspoon salt with roughly 6 tablespoons of coffee grinds. Since he said it was good for overly bitter coffee or stale water, I of course used a nicely balanced medium roast in regular water to test it. The results? It's like a salt lick got dropped in your coffee. It's really salty and really disgusting. So why has this been recommended so many times by various people? Perhaps it needs a little more investigation. First, I looked at roast profiles. Instead of a medium roast, I tested with a very light and acidic roast as well as a very dark and bitter roast. As you can see, I made a brew without salt as a baseline for comparison as well. Unfortunately, the problem was still the same: salt bomb. So next, I had to pay heed to the recommendation of kosher salt rather than iodized table salt. Science will tell you that there is virtually no difference between kosher salt, sea salt, and table salt, other than iodide being added to the table salt. So, since I have no idea where to get kosher salt, I used my preferred Kirkland sea salt from the pristine coast of Brazil. Well, the coast of Brazil anyway. Regardless of what science is telling us about all of the salts being equal, if you've tasted these side by side, you probably know there is a difference, primarily in the intensity of saltiness. So I tested the sea salt in the same manner as the table salt. A control and a test with 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Results again, while it was less intense than the table salt, it was still way too salty. This led me to see the main problem. That a 1/4 teaspoon is just too much salt. Breaking this down, we can see that a 1/4 teaspoon of any salt has about 590 milligrams of sodium. I took a weight measurement to see just how much salt I'd been using, and it weighed 1.325 grams. Now, this led me to look deeper at recommendations for salt quantity from other sources, and even Alton Brown himself mentions the amount of a pinch from time to time. Now, here's where things get tricky. Since a pinch has literally zero consistent measure in the real world, I needed to find something more tangible. And when we really get down to it, I needed to find what I'm calling the threshold of salt perception in brewed coffee. After testing a number of brews with gradually decreasing amounts of salt, I found that the proper amount does fall into the pinch category, meaning that it is an amount you can hold between your index finger and your thumb. Trying to be slightly more scientific than this vague description is about right at 0.12 grams of sea salt. This is equivalent to 53 milligrams of sodium, which is in the reasonable range of minerals that could be in your tap water to begin with. To put it another way, it's less sodium than an average egg. Now, let's look at just how much salt we're talking about here. That's a pinch right there. I weighed it into a filter so as not to make a mess everywhere, but you can see this is very, very little salt. Now let's look at the brew recipe that I use. The amount of coffee I use is 55 grams of medium to light roasted coffee. Make sure it's the right amount. A little more. Wait, no, too much. There we go. And I use precisely 1 liter of fresh water. Instead of using a certain amount of salt per scoop of coffee, I use 1 small pinch per liter of water, or 33 fluid ounces of water. Let's put the salt on the coffee grinds. Again, this is almost nothing, but any more and your coffee will taste salty. You might not have a jeweler's scale at home, so just remember, less is more. To put it all together and brew it up, and let's talk about the results. This is actually very interesting. Adding this small amount of salt not only lowered bitterness in dark roasts, but it also lowered sourness in very light roasts. Though the lowering of acid also takes away some of the vibrance that makes lighter roasted coffee so special to begin with. Let's look at why this is happening and what it means. Now imagine this graph is representative of a light roasted coffee. The salt is perhaps dissolved in your tap water already, and it has a medium bitterness, pretty high acidity, and average sweetness. In this example, bitterness and acidity could be interchanged equally. Now, if we add salt, bring it up to that salt perception threshold, our bitterness and acidity go down and the sweetness stays roughly the same. The reason for this is not that the salt is magically making something from the coffee that wasn't there to begin with, but rather changing our perception of flavor ever so slightly. The inclusion of this tiny amount of salt interferes with our ability to perceive bitterness and some sourness. So while the perception of these two elements is diminished, the perception of sweetness may actually increase because it's not inhibited by the salt or inhibited by the other flavors that we now can't taste as well. So as usual, Alton Brown is at least mostly correct. His blog just might need a little bit of an update. In conclusion, adding a small amount of salt can work to take away certain flavor elements that you may not like in a coffee. First, make sure to use sea salt or possibly kosher salt. Second, remember that less is more. A tiny pinch for a liter of water, or 33 fluid ounces of water, is all that you want. Third, this will lower your perception of bitterness and sourness a little bit, while sweetness remains around the same or is slightly enhanced. And lastly, freshly roasted coffee and beautiful coffees hopefully don't need this. But if you need it, remember that the coffee will lose some of its vibrance and elegance along with the other flavors that you're lowering. Ultimately, I just recommend buying better coffee. So that's all for today. Make sure and visit our website. Follow us for up-to-date reviews, articles, and videos. Thanks, guys.